Yes.
Oh, and we should remember to everybody else, please mute themselves.
Are you able to hear me okay? Yes? Okay, good. All right, well, we're really happy to have Alex with us tonight. And she actually was in Williamsburg long ago, maybe 2002 and 2003. She received one of the ornithology research grants from our bird club. And she was earning her master's degree studying under advisor Ruth Beck. So I thought that was really kind of cool that she's kind of one of us. But Alex Wilke is a coastal scientist at the Nature Conservancy Volcano.
Patty, you're muted.
You're muted, Patty.
How about now?
Good.
Okay. So did you hear about her being one of the grant recipients? Okay. So Rick must have muted me. I don't know. But anyway, so Alex Wilke is a coastal scientist at the Nature Conservancy, the Volcano, Virginia Coast Reserve on the eastern shore of Virginia. Her work at the TNC began 20 years ago when she came to Virginia to pursue her graduate work in wildlife conservation at the College of William and Mary and the Center for Conservation Biology. From there, she joined TNC full-time and spent several years supporting and growing the Conservancy's efforts to protect and manage migratory birds on the shore, with a particular emphasis on shorebirds and colonial waterbirds. Today, she leads VVCR's migratory bird program, protecting and stewarding over 50 miles of wild barrier island coastline for the benefit of migratory birds and working with partners from throughout the Western Hemisphere to advance regional, national, and international bird conservation initiatives. Alex received a BS in biology from Bates College and an MS in biology at William and Mary. Woohoo! Her graduate work focused on the conservation status and reproductive ecology of American oyster catchers nesting on Virginia's Barrier Islands, a species that she still works closely with today. She lives outside Cape Charles, Virginia, with her husband and 2 young boys. And I'm so glad we got everything working, and welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much, Patty and Nancy and everyone. It's really nice to be here. And I have to say, you know, it was almost 20 years ago that I was in Williamsburg at William and Mary, and I feel so fortunate that I'm still here and I'm still working with these birds. And I was telling Nancy, we had a meeting today. It's called the Virginia Coast Avian Partnership. So it was a meeting with all of the partners involved with bird conservation in coastal Virginia. And, you know, just looking around at some of those people that I've worked with for 20 years, I just feel really fortunate to still be here in such an amazing place working with great people. So thanks for having me. And I'm excited to talk to you all tonight about what we're doing out here on the shore. And I totally have as much patience as I could have with IT difficulties, because I was telling Nancy this morning, it took us an hour just to get our projector working for that meeting. So I understand the frustration. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get this rolling. Okay. Did everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay, and now the full slide. Okay, great. And I'm going to put up the chat. So I'll try to monitor the chat. If you have a question that you want to throw out while I'm talking, I'll do my best to see it and answer it. I don't know how you guys usually do that, but I'll do my best. And then obviously I can answer questions at the end too. But so yeah, this talk is called Connections Across the Hemisphere, Shorebird Conservation on Virginia's Eastern Shore. So I'll be talking about the work that we're doing out here at the Volcano Virginia Coast Reserve. Some of you might have noticed that our name has changed. We're now the Volcano Virginia Coast Reserve, which is named after a family who gave us a very generous gift recently. And it is a hard name to pronounce, but Baljanah is how you pronounce it. Let's see, let me get my situation here. Okay. Are the slides advancing for you all?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
good. So I just wanted to sort of give you a quick outline of what I'm going to cover first so that you can follow along. First, I'll give you just a real high level overview of VCR. Then I will give you another high level overview of our migratory bird program and sort of put that in the context of this region's significance to migratory birds, how important this area is for migratory birds. And then I want to go into just a few more details about specifically some of the things that we do out on our barrier islands to manage those habitats for shorebirds and other migratory birds. And that will sort of lead into telling you about a couple specific projects that are going on right now. One is sort of an adaptive management example where, you know, we've been looking at data over the long term, seeing something that needed to be addressed, and then trying to do something about it to improve our management to protect a particular shorebird species. And then another example is an emerging threats example, which is about offshore wind and shorebirds. And then finally, you know, the last slide that I have is just a little bit of information about visiting out here for some of you, if you haven't been out here, or if you have, but you know, would like a little bit more information about where to go and what to see, I'll give you some pointers at the end. So in terms of, hold on one second, I'm just gonna minimize a couple of things here that are in my way. Okay. So in terms of the Nature Conservancy in Virginia, so our work is really spread out across the entire state. And you can see in this
It's on,
slide.
Alex, I got it, so I don't know why you can't, but I guess I have to be on mine. Because
I'm sorry, was that Joanne? Were you asking a question? No. Okay, I'll just keep going, I guess. I wasn't sure if that was a question for me or not. So, and let me see, maybe I can see who that is. Okay, yeah, somebody muted. So in terms of the Nature Conservancy's work in Virginia, like I was saying, our work is really spread out across the state. We work in 4 main landscapes, is what we call them. We're out here in the Clinch Valley, out here in the west, the Allegheny Highlands, the Virginia Pinelands, where the red cockaded woodpeckers are. And then of course, I'm out here on at the Virginia Coast Reserve on the eastern shore on the southern tip of the Delmarva Peninsula. We have our office over here on the Eastern Shore is headquartered in Nazawattix at our Brownsville Preserve. And we have, this is a nice aerial view of the office, and we have 13 full-time staff, plus we hire several to a few seasonal staff every year. And this is a recent picture of our staff with 1 or 2 mixed in there, but it's a pretty big office at this point. It hasn't always been this big, but we have a lot going on out at VCR. So in terms of the lands that we protect on the Eastern Shore, TNC owns and protects about 38,000 acres out here, and this includes 14 of Virginia's barrier and marsh islands, and then also sort of our main mainland preserve, which is the Brownsville Preserve. And just to break those numbers down a little bit, if you think about conserved land on the Eastern Shore in general, there's about 130,000 acres of conserved land, and so that's 31% of the total land and marsh area over. TNC actually owns and protects about 19% of that, so about 25,000 acres. And then the rest, these almost 13,000 acres, you know, we include that in the acreage that we help to protect and manage, because those are private conservation easements that the Nature Conservancy holds and helps to protect. So that's about 10% of that total land area. And in this map right here, and this color coding that's represented over here on the right represents all of this conserved land on the Eastern Shore. And what really stands out is if you look at what we call this Barrier Island lagoon system, that area is almost entirely under some sort of protected conservation ownership and is managed in some way to some extent for the benefit of wildlife. So this is truly a coastal wilderness, and the area is really unmatched anywhere else on the East Coast. And it's an amazing place to work with birds and to work in conservation. And I'm really thankful for that every day. This is a graphic. The Virginia Coast Reserve, we celebrated our 50th anniversary a couple years ago. We're still kind of dragging it out because we weren't able to celebrate it in 2020 because of COVID. But our GIS specialist put this graphic together to show sort of that progression of conserved lands on Virginia's Eastern Shore from 1970 through the present. So you can see, not only from the Nature Conservancy, but also a lot of different partners, how much conserved land is out there. And there's actually a really cool story map about this on our website at nature.org/VCR or VVCR. And you can read a little bit more about the sort of history of that land protection. And this is all leading up to, why and how this place is so important for birds. But I always like to point out how close we were in Virginia to that not being the case. So in the late 60s and early 1970s, when there was so much development happening along other barrier islands along the Atlantic coast, the same thing was really sort of about to happen here. And this is a map, it's in this book called Seashore Chronicles, of the south end of Smith Island, which is over here on the shore. It's where the Cape Charles Lighthouse is. And this was a development that was ready to go on the south end of Smith Island. You can see there was a road to the mainland. There was all these houses. There was a golf course, an airport. It was, just about to happen that our islands were going to be sort of gobbled up in this huge development rush. Well, thanks to some incredible foresight of a lot of people, some initial funding from the Mary Flagler Carey Charitable Trust, the Nature Conservancy began to purchase some of the barrier islands starting in the late 1960s and early 1970s down around Smith Island. And that sort of was part of this cascading thing that happened where now most of our barrier islands are protected in perpetuity. So again, we're just so fortunate that that happened. And this is what they look like now. They don't look like Ocean City. They don't look like Virginia Beach. They are wild, intact barrier islands. And this is really phenomenal, not only for the birds, but also for our communities. These barrier islands are functioning like they're supposed to. They're actually functioning as barrier islands and sort of taking the brunt of a lot of that force that's coming from the Atlantic Ocean. They're protecting the coastal bays that are behind them that support aquaculture and nature-based tourism. It really is just a phenomenal place. And these are all photos from At Altitude Gallery, which is over here on the Eastern Shore. Gordon Campbell does a really great job at documenting these coastal areas. So in terms of the work that we do out here at VCR, we usually bucket our work into these 5 different programs. So we have our land protection efforts, which is really, at the heart of what the Nature Conservancy does. We have our migratory bird conservation program, which is what I lead over here. We have our marine restoration program where we're working to restore marine habitats, in particular eelgrass beds and oyster reefs. We have our coastal resilience program where we're really working with local communities to think about how vulnerable our communities are to sea level rise, climate change and sea level rise, and how they can best adapt and prepare for that. And then we have a really great education and outreach program to sort of connect our communities with what we do. And also sort of on top of all of that, overarching all of that, is preserve management. So we do own, we're one of the, we're the largest landowner out here on the Eastern Shore. And so we really take that responsibility of managing those lands very seriously, not only to protect the natural resources that we care about, but also to make sure that the human communities over here have the chance to enjoy those areas and you know, have a chance to connect with nature. So in terms of the migratory bird program, birds really have been at the heart of VCR since it was ever even a thing. And, you know, since TNC started purchasing the islands in the late 60s and 70s, the birds have been one of our main focuses. And over those 5 decades, we've built this program around them. And we really do have a focus on the barrier islands and the birds that are breeding out there and using them during the migration season. And that's really just in terms of where we focus a lot of our resources and our time and our energy. Our focus is much broader than that, but at some point we have to sort of be strategic about where we spend our time. And I wanted to mention this team pictured right here in the middle, because the work that we do at VCR today is really built on some of the information that this incredible group of volunteers collected over the years. So this is a group that we fondly call Williams et al. And Bill's on the call, but you know, this group of volunteers surveyed the Virginia Barrier Islands for decades, looking at the numbers of colonial water birds out there, and really, like I said, set the stage for everything that we do here today to protect these birds out on the end of this peninsula. So, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the program in just a minute, but I wanted to take a quick step back and talk about how important this region is in general for birds, and specifically the Eastern Shore. So, you know, first you have to think about where we are on the globe. So we are sitting right here, as this graphic depicts, right here in the middle of the Western Atlantic Flyway. And what that means during certain parts of the year is that we have this seasonal phenomenon of millions of birds moving between their breeding and non-breeding areas, moving through this area. Just millions of birds. And it's not just birds that, you know, are associated with water, like shorebirds and waterbirds and seabirds. It's these other groups like passerines and raptors. And so we have this incredible natural phenomenon that happens here a couple times a year. And all these birds are using the landscape differently. Some of them are just passing right over. Some of them are out over the ocean landscape. Some of them stop here and depend on this area for refueling. It's just a really incredibly complex situation in terms of how birds are using the area and how important it is for so many of these birds. Outside of those annual migration events, you know, we're at this sort of temperate latitude here on the southern end of the Delmarva Peninsula. So the region is really important for other birds during all other parts of the year. And that's, you know, including the breeding season and the non-breeding season. And a couple examples of that, just focused on the breeding season, is that our barrier islands and our coastal lagoon system in particular is incredibly important for breeding shorebirds and water birds. And just some examples, this area supports over 50% of all of Virginia's colonial nesting water birds. Our barrier islands support, this number has changed a little bit, but about 14% of the entire Atlantic coast breeding population of piping plovers. And we support about 30% of the Atlantic and Gulf Coast populations of American oystercatchers. And those are just a few examples. So, you know, there's a lot more I could talk about. This importance is recognized through several designations that many of you might be familiar with, but we're an Audubon region of global importance. We're also a Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve network of international importance. And these are, you know, these are just designations. They don't have any regulatory impact or regulatory authority, but they're really great jumping off points for talking about how important this area is for birds and sort of getting our message across about why the work we do here is so important in a much bigger context than just the Eastern Shore. And this Wissern site actually in 2020, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of that Wissern site, which was pretty exciting. So, okay, now I'll tell you just a little bit more detail about some of the work that we do in our migratory bird program. And specifically, I'll focus on how we manage some of the barrier islands for the benefit of shorebirds and waterbirds. So I usually bucket the work that we do in 3 different areas. So first we have our long-term monitoring of certain species that are using these landscapes. And the reason why we do this is that we need long-term data sets in order to really figure out what's going on with these birds out on the landscape. It's the only way we can really figure out if things are going well, if things are not going well, and we can incorporate that information into our management. So if we see something that's happening or a trend that doesn't look good, we can think a little harder about what may be going on, and we can adapt our management to address it. The other thing that we do with this information is we export it and integrate it into bigger regional conservation initiatives. So one example is piping plovers. They're a threatened species. There's a recovery effort for piping plovers, which is throughout the entire Atlantic coast. So all of the information that we collect over the long term for piping plovers gets fed up into that bigger regional effort to protect that species. And it's really important in terms of sort of filling the gaps for one of the really important areas for breeding plovers throughout its range. The next part of the program is our on-the-ground management of the properties that the Nature Conservancy actually owns and has a responsibility for managing. And these management efforts are geared towards protecting the birds that are using the habitats. And 2 of the examples, and I'll talk a little bit more about these in detail, where we really get the most bang for our buck are managing the threat of predators to nesting success of certain birds, and then also managing visitor disturbance to birds that are out on the islands. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, we have the stewardship component of our project. So this is really sort of connecting our work with the community. So we want to provide as many opportunities as possible to build a community of stewards here on the Eastern Shore to help sort of basically make our job easier. And this is really kind of a subcomponent of that on-the-ground management, but the idea here is really connecting the human communities with the bird work, and again, like I said, building a bigger community of stewards here on the Eastern Shore, and we try to do that as much as we can. And I have to say, everything that we do in any situation is only successful because of the partnerships that we have out here. And so all of this work that I'm talking about tonight really is a partnership effort, and it's all sorts of federal and state agencies, academic institutions, other local governments. It really is an impressive group of people that are dedicated to this work. And I'm reminded of this all the time, but especially days like today when we had that meeting today and we were all together sort of working to protect these birds. It's really a special and powerful thing. So, and another important part of the work that we do that I wanted to mention is, aside from those 3 main components, we're also always thinking about, what the next biggest threat is. So we're doing the best that we can to manage these birds on the ground, but we also want to be thinking about what's coming next and what might be impacting these birds. So obviously, and we work a lot with our academic partners in this context. So thinking about what are the questions that we have and how can we bring in those partners to help us answer some of those questions so that we can feed that back into our management. Sea level rise, of course, is a huge one. We're seeing the impacts of sea level rise in real time. I mean, there's, boat ramps now that 15 years ago, you didn't have to think about whether you were launching your boat at high tide and you couldn't get, your truck to the water, and you have to do that now. So we're seeing those things happening right before us, and we're seeing the impacts to the birds. So we're thinking really hard about some of those problems and how we can help birds be the most resilient they can be to that threat. And then another growing potential threat that I'll talk a little bit more about the end here is the potential impacts of offshore wind on birds, in particular shorebirds that are migrating out over the outer continental shelf. So I'll give you a quick update at the end about a project we're doing along those lines with Wimbrel. So, okay, now, thinking, I mentioned before the components of our work dealing with predator management and visitor disturbance. And I want to talk just a little bit more about that, because a lot of what we do inevitably sort of touches down on these barrier islands. And so our migratory bird program really is, in a way, our barrier island management program. And everything that we do out there, our overall objective is to minimize the threats to these birds, maximize the benefits, but also, like I mentioned in the beginning, we also want to allow compatible visitor use to these areas. So that's, that's sometimes the tricky part. And that is, I will say, I think it's the less tricky part for my job here on the Eastern Shore than it is for a lot of other people on the Atlantic coast. But it is, it is something that we have to think really hard about, because we want to make sure the birds are protected, but people can enjoy these areas too. So just to show you a few visuals about, why that's so tricky, you can picture these beach landscapes that we have out here on the Eastern Shore. These are the same areas that during the summer months, people want to be using as well. And then if you look a little bit closer at these pictures, you can see how the birds are using these areas. So right here in the upper left, these are two sort of medium-sized American oystercatcher chicks. Over here in the upper right, there's a Wilson's plover nest right in this red circle. And then on the bottom, again, there's two smaller oystercatcher chicks. So you can imagine, somebody wanting to recreate in these areas, but then also having this bird activity happening in the same areas, how that might not always be a good combination of things, and a very sustainable combination of things on the islands. This is another, let's see if this video works. Yeah. This is just another example. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, oh, well, it's okay because I'll see a nest when I'm out there. Like, I don't have to worry about that because I know what they look like and I'll see them. So this is a video of us going up to an American oystercatcher nest that we're monitoring. And we use paint sticks and GPS points to keep track of the nest, but you can see how well that nest blends in to the surrounding. And this sand is actually a little bit wet. It must have rained, that morning or something. So you can actually see the outer edges of this scrape or nest. Sometimes you can't even see that. So these nests just totally blend into the surroundings out there. And I mean, it's hard for us to find them sometimes, much less a visitor who's not accustomed to that. This is another example which isn't as discreet as that oystercatcher nest. I will say, if you find yourself in a rural tern colony and you don't realize it, then something else is going on. But this is a picture of a rural tern colony on one of our islands. In each one of those red circles is a rural tern nest. So these birds, they're sort of the epitome of the example of a colonial nesting bird. They group up in these tight colonies. They nest really just far enough away from each other that if they lunge, they can't reach their neighbor. And the noise when you're surveying a colony like this is deafening. This picture right here was taken when we were surveying the colony. That's why there's no birds in it. They had sort of lifted up and were above us at the time. But it just gives you another example of how the birds are using the landscapes out there, and how it's a tricky situation to manage compatible visitor use with what the birds need. You can just imagine, a dog or something like that running through an area like this. So that segues into, one of our most important components of what we do on the ground, which is visitor management. And it is a remote system. We don't have, let's see, a graduate student today presented about a project she's doing at Chincoteague. And I think she said over Memorial Day weekend this past year at the parking lot up on Assateague, she counted over 2,000 visitors just in, that couple of days. That is not the situation on the rest of the barrier islands at all. It is a remote system. And there's relatively few visitors compared to sites like that. But we do need to be thinking about it And, you know, it only takes a couple people or a couple events to make a big impact. So that's why we focus on this so much. So, and the way that we do this, first, you know, we have use policies. So that's the most fundamental thing that you can do, is have use policies and guidelines for how people can use these areas and not negatively impact the birds. Luckily, because the area is remote and the balance at this point is pretty good between visitor use and making sure the birds have what they need, we can allow visitor access on most of the islands. So on the islands that the Nature Conservancy owns, 90% of those shorelines are open for what we call low impact visitor use. We do have to restrict certain things like camping and dogs and vehicles and certain things that are not what we consider low impact and could have you know, negative impacts on the birds. We also have seasonal closures where we, you know, during the bird nesting season, at these sites that are open to the public, people can still go out there, but we just ask them to stay below the high tide line. So they're giving the birds their space, and yet they can still recreate on the islands. And we use these you know, temporary signs and symbolic fencing to sort of indicate where bird nesting areas are and remind people that it's bird nesting season and they need to you know, stay in the intertidal zone. We can't post the entire island chain. We do post probably about 300 to 400 signs at about 24 different access points along the islands. And this is a really great volunteer opportunity to get people out there seeing the sites and helping us put up these signs. And then, you know, I mentioned volunteers. Volunteers are really important for what we do. So I've mentioned it's that really remote system. It's about 50 to 70 miles of Barrier Island coastline. On our staff, we only have 3 people dedicated to, you know, managing the islands for birds. So by recruiting volunteers, it really just increases our eyes and ears out there. So we train, we call them island stewards, to sort of be eyes and ears out on the islands or at the boat ramps. So that's another strategy that we've developed. Since it is such a remote system with so many different access points, you can sort of target the boat ramps to catch visitors before they get on the water and make sure that they have the information they need about visiting the islands and about protecting the birds. And here you can see there's a fake nest right here. We're training some volunteers out on one of the islands about some of the messages that we have for visitors out there. Outreach is, no matter what we're doing, all the time we're doing outreach. So that's a huge component of visitor management. You know, whether it's talking to your neighbor or whether it's approaching somebody who's up in the dunes in the nesting area, we're just always thinking about that. And this is a really cool project that we just completed a couple years ago. It's called Explore Our Seaside. So, you know, we realize that the Virginia Barrier Islands they can be confusing. They're hard to get to. There's no infrastructure out there. There's no visitor center, you know, outside of Chincoteague to tell you where you are and what the rules are. And it's for visitors, it's hard to understand, you know, who owns what and where to even go for that information. So we developed this sort of package of educational material for visitors. And it consists of these interpretive kiosks that are at boat ramps heading out to the Barrier Islands. We've got a series of brochures and posters, and then we have a website. And all of the information is sort of consistent throughout all those materials. It's a unified message among all of these different partners that are managing those areas or invested in protecting those resources. And it's been a really great accomplishment for increasing the effectiveness of our outreach out on the seaside. So exploreourseaside.org is the website if anyone wants to check that out. So, and the second second component of our management that I wanted to mention is our predator management. So this is again, another one of those key things where we think we can really make a difference. We can get a lot of bang for our conservation buck. And, you know, that combined with visitors disturbance are where we put a lot of our resources. So going back to some of the data that the Williams et al. Crew collected from the mid 1970s all the way up to the early 2000s, this chart right here shows you the trends of some of the colonial nesting water birds out on the island. So these are the numbers of gull-billed terns, royal terns, common terns, least terns, and black skimmers on the islands over that time period. And you can see that's not really the type of graph that we want to see when we're thinking about what's going on with the birds out there. So over time, you know, this information, you know, triggered people to start thinking about, okay, what's going on out there? Why are the birds declining at that rate? At the same time, some other partners, Mike Irwin and others, were looking at the mammalian predator communities on the island. And what they saw over the same time frame, the mid to late 1970s into the late 1990s, was there was an expansion in the distribution of mammalian predators, so primarily fox and raccoon, an expansion in their distribution along the island chain. And you can see that represented by these shaded islands here in these two graphics, in combination with a decline in the number of colonial waterbird colonies. So you know, there was this sort of clear connection between the threat of mammalian predators on the islands and what they were doing to the colonial birds. And I think, you know, and this was a little bit before my time, but in the late 1990s, it just became really clear that there was a decision, you know, the islands were either going to be managed for the benefit of the birds with controlling predator populations, or the predators were just going to sort of take over and really make those habitats unsuitable for the birds that we care about. So over the years, you know, this is really a collaborative effort among all the partners that are managing the barrier islands in Virginia. We've sort of adopted this adaptive management strategy where, you know, we know that we're managing these habitats for the benefit of these conservation targets. So the birds that are using these islands for nesting. We identified the threat, which was this increase in mammalian predator populations on the islands. And we worked with partners at USDA Wildlife Services to identify the strategy of selectively removing predators from some of the islands to sort of reduce and release that predation pressure. And then over the years, we've developed monitoring protocols so that we could have metrics to measure the success of those selective predator removals. And I just have a few examples of those monitoring efforts. So this is a chart showing the number of breeding American oystercatcher pairs on the Virginia Barrier Islands from 2000 through 2021. And you can see, and so remember, those sort of collaborative, more widespread predator management efforts on the barrier islands began in the late 1990s, early 2000s. You can see we've had this really great increase in the number of nesting pairs of oystercatchers on the islands. We have over 500 pairs nesting out there. So, you know, there's a lot of variables out there to consider though. So we can't say that removing predators has been the only factor involved, but with what we know about the landscape out there and these dynamics, that has played a large role in this increase in this population. If I put up a similar chart for piping plovers, it would show a similar incline until about 2016 or 2017. And there's actually a different story starting to happen out there with piping plovers right now, which I'm not hitting on that tonight, but I can answer some questions about that if, if we have time at the end. But our plover numbers actually seem to be decreasing now since about 2016, 2017. At such a rate that we're putting quite a bit of effort into figuring out what's going on. We don't think it's mammalian predators. I'll say that much at this point. This is another example of some of the long-term monitoring that we've done and some of the metrics. So this chart right here is showing you, again, American oystercatcher productivity on the Virginia Barrier Islands. You have the years here from 2004 through 2021. Productivity, which is the number of chicks fledged per pair per year, is shown with the blue bars. And then the number of pairs monitored in every year is shown with the orange line. And this isn't as pretty as a picture of that nice sort of upward trend of the number of nesting pairs of oyster catchers. And what you can see is that we've had this really sort of dramatic decline in the overall productivity on the island since about 2016. For years, we just sort of, you know, we're so happy, and we were one of the only places on the Atlantic coast where we had, you know, productivity levels for oyster catchers that were this high. And so now we're really sort of scratching our heads at why this is happening with oyster catchers. We haven't seen the breeding pair numbers respond quite yet to these low productivity numbers. I imagine that we're not far from seeing that response, but I'll talk a little bit more about how we're addressing that in the next couple slides. So that, you know, that, oops, sorry, someone's in the waiting room. I just admitted them. That brings us to, I mentioned these two projects that I wanted to talk about. The one is an adaptive management example. So we have this long-term data set, and we're seeing this sort of trend that we don't like. So we want to take that information and feed that into what we're doing for management and try to figure out if there's something we can do from a management perspective to fix that. So that triggered us to work with our partners at Virginia Tech. And right now we're trying to figure out what is impacting American oystercatcher chick survival on Wetumpka Island. So we do know from, and I don't have this information up here, but from that long-term monitoring, that we don't think that hatching success is necessarily the problem at some of these sites. So that leads us to think that, you know, maybe something's going on with chick survival. Maybe there's something out there that we just can't quite put our hands on that's resulting in these chicks not surviving to fledging. So we have a PhD student who's trying to tackle this question on Wetumpka Island. And I just wanted to say a little bit about what she's working on. So first, in terms of the study species, American oystercatcher. So Patty mentioned at the beginning, this is the species that I did my graduate work with when I was at William and Mary. I'm so incredibly fortunate to still be working with them. This bird right here, AU2, this is a bird I actually banded in 2003 as a chick. It had very different bands at the time that were a different kind, and it since had lost some bands. And then a colleague of mine actually caught that bird in Georgia several years back and replaced those old bands with these fancy new red ones from Georgia. So it's, you know, just kind of tells the story about how long we've been working with some of these birds. But anyway, so a little bit about them. They're one of our temperate nesting shorebird species, like the piping plovers and the Wilson's plovers and the willets. The population here in Virginia, we have both resident birds, so birds that stay here year round, and then we also have birds that migrate out of the area for their non-breeding season. And they're distributed really throughout coastal Virginia. We have pairs breeding on the western shore of the bay, on the shorelines of the Chesapeake Bay, on these upper bay islands. And then most of the breeding pairs are in the Seaside Lagoon system here and along the Barrier Islands. So about 60% of the state's pairs are on the Barrier Islands and about 25% in the Seaside Lagoon. Overall, we support about 30%, and I think I mentioned this earlier, 30% of the Atlantic and Gulf Coast breeding population. We have over 700 pairs of oyster catchers breeding in Virginia. That's a 2018 estimate. We're gearing up to repeat this survey in 2023. So we'll see what our numbers are looking like at that point. And we also have the third largest wintering population for American oystercatchers. So Virginia is definitely a hotspot for these birds. And like I said, you know, I would argue places like Metomkin, I think Metomkin is probably the most important breeding spot, breeding site for oyster catchers throughout the entire Atlantic coast and Gulf Coast range. So looking back at, you know, this trend, which is what got this project started, these low productivity numbers from the barrier islands. If you were to pull out Metomkin from that overall barrier island chain, the graph looks exactly the same. And the trends on Metomkin really play a large role in driving the overall trends for the barrier islands because there's so many pairs that nest there. We have right now over 125 pairs that nest just on Metomkin Island. So what Michaela is doing to look at the factors that are impacting chick survival at this site is, and this is just showing you where Metomkin Island is on the island chain. She's using this really cool system for tracking chick survival, where she's putting these tiny little radio tags. If you can see it right there, they weigh less than a gram. She's gluing them onto these just hatched American oyster catcher chicks. And as they're running around the island landscape, she's got this series of, you know, emitting their radio frequencies. She's got these series of nodes. Each one of these red dots is a node that is receiving those radio signals. So essentially she has this remote grid out here that's detecting the oyster catcher chicks basically in real time. Every 15 seconds they send out a signal. And because of that, she can track, you know, when the tag stops moving, and then she can go out there and try and figure out what happened to the chick. So these are just her 2021 results. Her 2022 results, I didn't have updated for this slide, but she tagged 16 chicks in 2021 and was able to confirm the fate of 75% of them. 7 of them actually fledged, which was really great for the birds, but it wasn't that great for us determining what was killing chicks out there. They weren't that successful in 2022. But what she found was, you know, she's definitely confirming that ghost crabs are a predator of chicks out there. It's something that we've known, but we've never really been able to quantify it. And she's also found some pretty good evidence that peregrine falcons are taking chicks. If I were to add her 2022 results to this, the pattern is about the same, ghost crabs and avian predators like peregrine falcons. There are a lot of questions around that because avian predators are sometimes you're basing it on sign and the way that the carcass looks, so it's not definitive, but it is pointing us in the direction of additional studies that we can do to try and get a better handle on what's happening out there. In addition, over the course, and this was something that we didn't really anticipate, but over the course of the study, we put a camera on this tower, which was the base station that was receiving all the information from those nodes that I mentioned, because we were concerned about the fact that we were putting these sort of perches out on the landscape, which predators really like. And despite the fact that the entire top of this tower was covered in perch deterrents, there was a great horned owl that used that just all the time. So that again is sort of pointing us, it's not giving us a definitive answer, but it's pointing us in the right direction for future studies on how we can really sort of pinpoint what might be impacting chick survival at this site. We'd like to actually be able to tag some great horned owls with GPS tags so that we might be able to see exactly where they're foraging and if in fact they're strategically targeting these beach areas to grab chicks at night, which could potentially be happening. I don't want to make great horned owls out to be the bad guy, but they are known for being really smart and figuring these types of situations out. Okay, so the next, the next example, and I think the last example that I wanted to give you about the work that we do out here is a project that we just started this past fall or late summer, I guess. And it's, I mentioned it's it's sort of an emerging threats example. So this project is, we're working with the Center for Conservation Biology and Dominion Energy to actually try to evaluate the impacts of offshore wind on migrating whimbrel in particular. And let's see. And sorry about the inconsistency of the slide design here. I took these right from a presentation that I just did last month at a conference in Massachusetts, and I didn't reformat them all to match all the other slides. But again, our project team is, there's Brian Watts, Chance Hines, Laura Duvall, and Bart Paxton at the Center for Conservation Biology, right over where you guys are in Williamsburg. And then from the Nature Conservancy, there's Zach Polton, Mario Blitbit, and myself. And this project is being funded by Dominion Energy. So it's being funded by the industry, which is just an interesting sort of example in and of itself. So first, just a little bit about whimbrel. So unlike the oyster catchers, which are a temperate nesting species, these are a subarctic and Arctic nesting species. So we don't have these birds here during the nesting season. We only have them here during migration. There's two primary breeding populations that use the Western Atlantic flyway. So two populations that are kind of touching down here, literally and figuratively, on the eastern shore. But there's the Mackenzie River Delta population, the Mac Delta population, and the Hudson Bay breeding population. We know that these birds, that their major wintering areas are on the northeast coast of South America. So the birds that we see here in the spring and fall ultimately end up, for the most part, in that area for the non-breeding season. And we also know that the eastern shore of Virginia is one of the most important staging areas for whimbrel along the Western Atlantic flyway. So Brian and a bunch of other researchers that have been tagging this species for just over a decade sort of combined all of that tracking information to really tell the story about how these birds are moving throughout the Western Atlantic flyway. And the eastern shore, of course, lit up as one of those important staging areas. And our best estimates right now are that we host or support, or the habitats here along the eastern shore of Virginia support at least 15,000 whimbrel in spring migration. And, the number is probably higher than that. That's based on past surveys combined with estimated rates of decline. So it really is just an estimate, but the bottom line is we have a lot of whimbrel here. And we know these are long distance migrants. They're traveling thousands and thousands and thousands of miles during their migration, and it's one of the most vulnerable life stages that they have throughout the annual cycle. So just a little bit of background in terms of the offshore wind component of the project. Some of you might be familiar with the CVAL project, the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project. This is Dominion's offshore wind farm that's being constructed about 43 kilometers due east of Virginia Beach. And you can see this yellow area here is the CVAL lease area. Currently, there are two test turbines that are already out there in the water and operational. And those test turbines are located right here on sort of the western edge of that lease area. When this project is fully built out, the commercial phase, which is anticipated to be 2026, it's a 2.6 gigawatt project. There will be 176 14.7 megawatt turbines. Each one is almost 250 meters tall, and the lease area covers about 450 square kilometers. So it's a big area, it's a big project. And Dominion anticipates that overall, this project will generate enough power to, enough energy to power up to 660,000 homes every year. So this, hopefully you can see this okay. This image right here, again, from Gordon Campbell at Altitude Gallery, you can see those two test turbines out in the distance. They're right here. And this is taken from Smith Island on the southern end of the Delmarva Peninsula, looking due southeast across the ocean out over the outer continental shelf. You can imagine if you're, for example, a whimbrel that might be leaving the eastern shore on southbound migration, heading out over the outer continental shelf, this is what you're looking at. And eventually there's going to be 176 of these across that big area. So, you know, just keeping that, you can keep that image in mind and think about the importance of the area for shorebirds and, you know, how there might be this potential impact. We also know from some of the previous tracking work that was done with Whimbrel and that originated on the eastern shore of Virginia, that these birds, we already do know that they're crossing out over the outer continental shelf due southeast, and they're actually passing through and nearby the lease area. You can see that from this figure here that we have in press. It actually might be out already. And these birds are doing that both during the northbound and maybe a little bit more so during the southbound migrations. The thing is that this information, which is the same case with most tracking information up until recently, doesn't have any information about altitude. So if you think about offshore wind, that's a really critical component because we can't evaluate that exposure risk until we know how high the birds are, you know, when they're flying potentially through these areas. So that's where this advanced tracking technology that's available now is so key, and where we're just going to begin to sort of unlock all of these answers for some of these questions. So the objective of this partnership of the project in partnership with Dominion is, you know, we want to continue the more samples, the better, to sort of refine what we know about the exact migratory routes of the birds. But we want to do that with this advanced tracking technology so that we can specifically evaluate that potential exposure risk to the CVAL lease area. Specifically, our goal is to tag 30 Whimbrel over the course of 2 fall migration periods, 2022 and 2023. And I just have a couple highlights from, so this is really just the beginning of this project. Just a couple highlights from our 2022 capture season, which we were really quite happy with. These birds are notoriously difficult to capture, but we were actually able to, and this is Mario releasing a Whimbrel out on Elkins Marsh, just off of Box Tree. That was Brian Watts there in the foreground. But we were able, over the course of from July 25th to August 12th, without being in the field every day, we were able to trap and band 18 adult Whimbrel. We were really happy with that. And 15 of those birds received the GPS transmitters that I was talking about. And you can see here, while the birds, these transmitters are cellular tags, so they're communicating via cell networks. They're able to upload all of the data that they're collecting at preset intervals. So these images right here in the upper right show you the movement patterns of these birds while they were still here in Virginia. And they were connected to the cell networks. Every 24 hours, they were uploading this amazing detailed information about how they're using the landscape. And you can see these patterns. This is off of Willis Wharf here. These Whimbrel were spending their days and low tide periods foraging on these vast mudflats off of Willis Wharf, and then moving to these nighttime roost sites further out in the marshes of the lagoon system. So even without considering the offshore wind component of the project, we already have these amazing data sets from each one of these individually tagged birds showing us how they're using the system. So, I mean, that's going to be just one part of the fun part of looking through this data eventually. All the birds are offline now. So that is a tricky part with the cellular tags. If they're out of good cell range, they're not going to be able to upload their data, but they're still collecting data. So this really wasn't a surprise. We hoped that they would find a good cell network on their non-breeding grounds. But we're presuming now that hopefully most of the birds are on their non-breeding grounds, their tags are collecting data, and when they reconnect to a good cell network, likely during their spring migration, we'll get a huge data dump, and that's when we'll be able to really start to begin to evaluate that exposure risk to the CVAL lease area and to other potential wind energy areas. And we have 16 tags to be deployed next August when the birds are here again during their fall migration. So that is really all that I have. And in a nutshell, I just hope that I've given you a better understanding of the work that we do here at VCR to protect all of these birds. I didn't even touch on piping plovers and red knots and some of the other species that we work with. They have their own conservation challenges and their own dedicated groups of people that are working with them throughout the entire Western Hemisphere. But it really is an amazing place to work, and we've got a lot going on out here with a tremendous set of partners. So hopefully I've covered a little bit of that tonight. And this slide I just had at the end, and this will be, I can distribute this in another way to the bird group, but there's a lot of great new resources out here on the shore to help you figure out your way if you're visiting out here and birding. Our TNC resources, we have our website at nature.org, the exploreourseaside.org website that I mentioned before. I'm sure many, if not all of you, know about birdingeasternshore.org, which, much if not all of the narrative on that website was written by our dear friend Ned Brinkley, who passed away not too long ago, and is really a very special resource that we all have now to guide our birding on the Eastern Shore. There's great eco tour guides over here that can take you out on the water to go do things like look for long-billed curlews in the wintertime. And then I put this up here. We do our annual Whimbrel Watch with the Nature Conservancy in the center and some other partners in May of every year. So everyone is welcome to join that. And I have more information about that too. So I think that's enough for me. I feel like I've been talking all day and I can feel like my voice is starting to go, but I'm definitely happy to answer any questions that anyone has before you all get to down to business at your business meeting. And I'll stop sharing, I guess, if that's okay, Nancy. And
Yeah, that's great.
okay.
I do have a question.
Sure.
That was fabulous, Alex. I think we all want to be volunteers starting tomorrow. Sign us up. I'm wondering how responsive Dominion appears to be, or what sort of sense do you get from them that they are going to respond to the results that you get once you know altitude, height, and whatnot?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Oh, that's a really good question. And I will say just right off the bat that, the fact that Dominion put that lease area where it is relatively far offshore, that was the first really great thing that they did. I mean, they avoided the nearshore areas where we know so much of the bird activity is. So I just wanted to say that right up front. And then, the second thing is that they're funding this work. So they really are supportive in learning more about these potential impacts. In terms of what the industry could actually do if we, sort of uncover or quantify that there is significant risk. Those are some more difficult questions because the answers to that for offshore wind are just not as concrete as they need to be. I've heard things like seasonal restrictions or, different things that they could do seasonally for the activity at the wind farm. But that's no one's really talking about many specifics at this point about what might be done to mitigate that risk, if in fact it's a big one. In the chat, somebody, Catherine says, how large a group of volunteers do you have on average? It's all over the place. The work that we do is a little bit restricted because we're going out on boats. So, maybe we'll take a group of 4 to 5 volunteers out to help us post signs. Maybe we'll take 1 or 2 people to go help us, clear a trail. It's really varies, but it's usually not much bigger than that because we're always restricted by boat space and logistics. our office, the Nature Conservancy over here on the Eastern Shore, we have some other efforts like eelgrass seed collection that's done every May that is a good chance to get out on the water, and you can look at birds while you're supposed to be collecting eelgrass. But they can bring a lot more volunteers at once. Those are, groups of, dozens of volunteers at once. So it really does vary depending on what the opportunity is.
I have a question.
Yes, Deborah.
Hi, Alex. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Are there any theories or ideas about what's going on since 2016? Have you compared the data that you're getting on the nests and the decline to other areas up along the coast, or do you think it's something specific to the Bay and the Eastern Shore, or are theories open for discussion? Or
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll use every species is different, obviously, and the information that I was showing you is was from American oyster catchers, but we're seeing similar patterns with piping plovers, and that we've over the years used those species as sort of indicator species to help
Right.
us, tell what's going on out there. So the piping plovers, as an example, we're part of the Southern Recovery Unit in that regional recovery initiative. In Virginia, we have the bulk of the number of pairs in that Southern Recovery Unit. Our numbers just look horrible compared to some of the other recovery units. Like, Massachusetts has like almost 1,000 pairs of piping plovers. Their productivity is high, their trajectory for number of pairs is high, and they have plovers nesting in like parking lots. So, so we're really scratching our heads because we have this wild, pristine set of barrier islands where, we just think that they should be doing a lot better. What we're trying to do is look very closely at all the data that we have, pinpoint whether it's happening at the egg stage or the chick stage. We're sort of leaning towards chick stage, and that there might be something going on out there, with avian predators that are impacting chick survival.
are you
That's
able to examine, if you find dead chicks or anything, are you able to examine them, take blood sample, DNA sample? Has that happened?
In a lot of cases, you can make some assumptions based on the carcass and how
Right.
it was treated or eaten. But again, those are assumptions, and we haven't been doing any other, testing than that. And otherwise, it is really tricky, because if the chick doesn't have a tag on it, or the avian predator doesn't have a tag on it, there's just a lot of assumptions. And when you have a chick that's as small as a piping plover, your options for tracking those birds are basically none. So yeah, we're really thinking hard about what might be going on out there.
Interesting. Thank you so much.
Overwash, washover is an issue. These islands are definitely experiencing the impact of sea level rise in some areas. But we don't think that that's like a major driving force in this most recent trend that we've been seeing.
Okay, interesting. Thank you very much.
George asked in the chat, can TNC accommodate groups for Whimbrel Watch? Yes. So Whimbrel Watch is just sort of an open house style event, sort of like the Hawk Watch at Kiptapeak. But I am more than happy to coordinate with someone if they, strategically want to bring a group at a certain time. So yeah, we could just sort of talk that through and figure out when a good time is. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions for Alex? Anybody?
There is a
Alex?
question from Kathy Flanagan about the percentage of the total acreage is owned by TNC.
Oh yeah, 38,000 on the Eastern Shore. I can't think of what that percentage is of the total land area on the Eastern Shore. I can't think of that off the top of my head. Sorry. I'd have to look it up.
I was just curious as to how, how much territory you really had. Looks like a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. It's most of the barrier islands,
That's
and then
yeah.
a lot of mainland preserves too. Yeah, I just can't think of that exact number.
Yeah, okay.
I will next time though. I'll look it up.
I was just trying to get an idea. Yeah, but it looks like a lot. Anybody else? How about Williams et al.? I love that photo. Bill and Jerry, Bill and Ruth.
I do too.
That's a great photo. That's a great group. Well, if no other questions, Alex, thank you so much. That was fascinating and fabulous, and we appreciate so much all the work you do. And please call on us in any way. We would, I think you could get some volunteers out of this group.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and it was really nice to see you all.
Great, thank you. And you are more than welcome to stay for our business meeting. It's very quick, but I'm sure you got young ones there, and we understand if you need to go. But thank you so
I
much.
do. My husband's traveling and they're on their own for dinner, so I might go downstairs and see what kind of chaos they created. But thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
everybody. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, well, that was wonderful. And before we go any further, I have to say that Rick Brown saved the night tonight. We had a little bit of a glitch with our Zoom connection. Rick had about 20 minutes to set us straight, get us rerouted, get everybody on board. So Rick, we owe you big time. We've been owing you for quite some time, but now we owe you even more. So thank you to Rick, and thanks for everybody for your patience in getting on board here tonight. It worked out. And we got to get Ann back from Rome. We're going to have to talk with her. Let's see. George Martin, are you on the call still?
Yep.
And would you like to say anything about Saturday's field trip?
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be a good turnout, and it looks like the weather is going to cooperate. Right now, the latest forecast was calling for temperatures in the 40s, light wind, and best as I can tell, we're going to be there during falling to low tide. We've got 4 people who have expressed interest in carpooling. If there's anybody else that wants to carpool, please let me know, because if you're not on the list, I'm not going to wait for you at the Colony Square Shopping Center. Okay, but we want the carpoolers to be at the Colony Square Shopping Center by 7 o'clock for a departure no later than 7:15. Everybody else who wants to get there on their own will be meeting at the entrance to the preserve at for an 8 o'clock start at Grandview Nature Preserve.
Great, thank you. I did do a quick preview on Sunday. I had 3 species of scoters, buffleheads, loons, brant. So winter birds are moving back in. And with a couple cold nights that we're going to have, I think we'll get even more.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a good trip. Thank you, George.
Yep.
Scott Hemler, are you on the call?
I'm here.
Okay,
Hello.
you want to mention our next bird walk?
Yes, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, the 26th of November, we're having our bird walk at New Quarter Park. We'll meet at 8 o'clock at the parking lot of the visitor center, our usual spot. And there won't be many leaves on the trees then. So hopefully we'll have a better luck at seeing actually the birds that are here. A lot of our winter residents are all here now. So yeah, it'll be fun. I'll probably bundle up, especially when we go down to the dock down there by the Queens Creek. It could be cold and windy down there. So the 26th, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, a bird walk at New Quarter Park.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Those have been very popular. You're doing a great job with those. Patty, do you want to say anything about our upcoming meetings or actually lack thereof in December? Patty? No?
I think
December,
we're
we
good for
don't.
now.
Okay, yeah, we don't have a meeting in December because we do have Christmas bird count. Is Jim Corliss on the call? Probably not. He's still a hardworking man. Christmas bird count will be December 18th, Sunday, all day. If you would like to participate, either get a hold of Jim. His email is it's in the newsletter, jcorliss240, I believe. Well, it's in the last newsletter. Or let me know and I'll hook you up with Jim. if you'd like to go out on a team or by yourself or from your house or do your feeder watch, everybody's welcome. It's a great day. It's a lot of fun. And it's been going on since 1900. So we gotta keep it going. So that is Sunday, December 18th. Oh, here's Jim's. Jim's email is jcorliss240@cox.net. jcorliss240@cox.net. I did send out a link to the Winter Wildlife Festival. The registration just opened yesterday. There, take a look at that. There's lots of activities. There's a couple of boat trips. There's the tram ride down to the state park. There's a lot of fun stuff. So you might want to take a look at those. Let's see, Mary Ellen, we don't have a newsletter in December. So is Mary Ellen on? And no, want to say anything?
Really nothing much to say.
Okay, all right. So no newsletter in December, but be thinking about submissions for the January newsletter. Oh, keep that in mind. I didn't hear from any other board members that they have anything they wanted to mention. We do have our nominating committee is going to announce, we're going to have our election of the executive board tonight. And Shirley is going to just give you the slate. I'll turn it over to Shirley.
Okay, thanks very much. I was really just feel so fortunate to have heard Alex Wilke talk about what's going on over the shore, and I'm just so grateful for the work that they're doing, and that it doesn't look like the Outer Banks like it could be. Anyway, November is the month of the year where we elect our officers for the following year, and the nominating committee this year was Patty Maloney and Babs Giffen and me, and our job this year was really quite simple, and it was easy because everybody agreed to serve another year. So, but nevertheless, we still have to have an election. So I'm going to read the proposed slate, and this is the proposed slate for the executive board for 2023. For President, Nancy Barnhart. Vice President Programs for Patty Maloney. Vice President Editor of the Flyer, Mary Ellen Hodges. Treasurer Ann Carpenter. Secretary Kathy Millar. Member at Large and Assistant Newsletter Editor Gary Carpenter. And Member at Large Shirley DeVan. Now, are there any nominations from the floor or from the Zoom, with the understanding that if you're nominating somebody, then you've chatted with them ahead of time and gotten permission to nominate them? So are there any nominations from the Zoom crowd? If you have a nomination, speak up, and we'll see you. I don't see anybody raising their hand. So I would like a motion from somebody in the meeting to accept this slate, I guess by acclamation. Does anybody want to make that motion?
So moved.
And who was
So
that?
moved.
Bill. Okay, thank you, Bill. And is there a second?
I second.
Was that Deborah?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. So I guess officially, is there any discussion? All right, so those of you who are members of the Bird Club, I ask you to vote on accepting this slate of officers for 2023 by, I guess, raising your hand and hold it up until we've counted. 1, 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, 8. Well, some people have their video turned off, but I think we had enough people vote to make sure that these folks will be taking care of the bird club next year. So first of all, thanks to them for their good service during 2022. Great job, everybody. Those of you who do programs and newsletters, you're doing a great job, and we appreciate you staying on for next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Shirley, for doing that. And don't go away, Shirley, because I believe you wanted to say a few words about the adopt a species for the Breeding Bird Atlas. The floor is yours. Mhm.
Yeah. Well, the last, those of you who have been with us for a while know that during from 2016 to 2020, we were out in the field and we were doing work looking for evidence of breeding birds in Virginia. And many of us spent many hours out in the field during that 5-year period collecting data. And people around Virginia were doing the same thing we were doing. And tens of thousands of checklists were submitted. If you just can imagine the order of magnitude of the data set that they collected over 5 years across Virginia. It's an amazing amount of data. And during 21 and here into 2022, analysis is underway. You can imagine the cleanup effort that has to go into that, and the mashing the data, slicing and dicing. And so their job is to determine for the most recent 5 years, the breeding birds in Virginia. And they pretty much nailed it down. There's some new breeders. If you want to find out who they are, you have to log into the website. But at any rate, for the next 5 years and through 2025, the VSO is in charge of preparing the data and preparing the atlas, which will be a website that we'll launch in 2025. Well, that's a pretty major effort, and we're in a big fundraising period right now. And the VSO is totally responsible for raising those funds. For the data collection period, DWR provided a good bit of the funding for that, but for this period, the analysis and publication, the VSO has to fund that. So one of our fundraising campaigns is called Sponsor a Species. And of the 200, almost 200 species breeding in Virginia, you can adopt 1 or 2 or 3 to sponsor for the atlas that's going to be published online in 2025. So we, out of the 200 or so species, over 55 have already been sponsored, which is just incredible. But that means there's about 140 left to sponsor, and we're relying on birders and bird enthusiasts from around Virginia to sponsor a species. So I'll send out a note to the chapter with details and everything, if that's okay, at some point in the next few days. But we're in the fundraising mode here for the next few years, for 2023, 24, and 25, because we have to hire an editor, we have to have the website designed and published, we have to hire writers, and also the analysis, with the data crunching, the maps, all the maps that have to be prepared. It's not a small project, and all those folks are we're going to pay those folks. We're not going to be relying on volunteers. So you can sponsor a species, and some really great birds are still available to be sponsored. Purple martins can be sponsored, available. Carolina chickadee is still available. I think Carolina wren is still available. A lot of your favorite backyard birds are still available to sponsor. So I'll send a note around to the bird club, and you can look at it and It's a great way to make a year-end tax deductible donation. Goes to a great cause. And your name will be on that website as a sponsor of this species for a long, 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 long time. So you'll go down in posterity as sponsoring Carolina Wren. So I sponsored the Bethard Warbler. Surprise. So anyway, but you'll have to get some information about that. And I hope you'll decide to sponsor a species. It ranges from $200 a year for 3 years to $1,000 a year for 3 years. And there are about 80 species left in that lower affordable range. So if you have any questions, I can take 1 or 2 here now, or you can respond to my email when I send it out. Bill, you're president of the VSO. You want to chime in?
No, you covered it all, Shirley, perfectly.
Okay, Bill.
You did.
Bill's already sponsored his species.
Yeah.
Species he researched as a graduate student. He's already sponsored his species.
What's his
Yeah.
species?
I'm sorry?
Glossiobus.
Oh,
And Deborah has already sponsored a species. Deborah, would you sponsor?
I went for the osprey.
yay.
I went
Yeah.
big.
And Babs, you want to say who you sponsored?
Bet I know.
Screech owl. Screech owl.
Yeah, and Nancy sponsored.
Brown-headed nuthatch.
Oh,
Yeah, so
And I think everybody knows that the Bird Club sponsored the red-headed woodpecker. And we did that in recognition of Bill and in memory of Ruth Beck, the 2 founders of the Bird Club. So we were thrilled to be the sponsors of that.
nice.
I don't think I'm done yet. I'm still looking over the list,
me too.
trying to figure out what's next. Someone's gonna have to jump in and do brown-headed cowbird, and someone's gonna have to do it.
And the European starling and
European starling, you gotta do it.
yeah.
So,
But there are a
yeah.
lot of warblers. There are a lot of warblers left. I can tell you a lot of warblers are left. So, all right, I'm done. I'm done. So,
Okay,
but you'll get
great.
an email from me with some information.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Shirley. Anybody else? Any of our other board members or chair people on board? Anybody have anything? Anything, Kathy?
I know I haven't done the trivia and I've been thinking about doing a little holiday version perhaps, and maybe I can just send it out to the membership.
Sure.
And just
Sure.
something like that. Also, is it all right if I ask the Bird Club to invite them and send the link to the meeting that Native Plant Society is having tomorrow? I didn't know if people like to get that kind of thing.
Sure, I think that's fine.
It's going to be on butterflies, but of course, it's, you know, what that's what some birds eat.
We're equal opportunity nature lovers, so I
Yeah, right.
think that would be great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Yeah. Shirley, you raising your hand?
Yeah, gosh, we're only about 6 weeks away from January 1. So January 1 means that we're going to have our New Year's Day bird get together. And I think this year we'll do it at New Quarter Park, just like we did last year, because that worked out really well.
Yep.
So I'll send out a note about that too, but stay tuned for that. Plan to gather at New Quarter Park the early afternoon of New Year's Day to celebrate the beginning year of birding.
Great. Well, we look forward to that. That's a fun day, special day. Judy?
Nancy, maybe you mentioned it and I missed it, but I just wanted to remind people that in the newsletter, there was a page dedicated to renewing your membership to the Bird Club. And this
Yes,
is
thank
time to
you.
do
Thank you for pointing that out. Yep, it's time to do that. And when you do that, consider some of the other, the opportunities to donate to some of the other conservation fund, to our nature camp scholarships. There are other things take a look at when you're when you're renewing your membership.
And going online is very easy.
It's very easy.
It's
Yeah,
also easy to donate to something too, because
exactly.
you can do it
Right.
at the same time, so.
Yep. Yep. That's a great feature that we can now do that.
And
Okay,
there's
yeah.
a note in the chat box from Cindy about updates about dues, and I think the due structure is the same. It hasn't changed, but the dues are dues.
Dues are due. Okay, anybody else? Anybody have any great observations they need to tell us about? We did mention Deborah's Nashville warbler from yesterday. That's quite the late bird. We're seeing those things.
And
Anybody?
somebody asked back at the beginning of the meeting where Green Springs was, so you might want to just tell people how they can find Green Springs on the web and off of Route 5.
Right, Green Springs Interpretive Trail. I'm sure there's something on the internet about it. It's actually behind Jamestown High School. I believe that's called Eagle Way. I think that's what that is. So you just drive in and go past the entrance to the high school, and you drive back to the parking lot, and it's a wonderful trail. It's been just terrific birding, actually since the beavers got there. It changes every day. The winter waterfowl are coming back. This gallinule that Bill found, I believe on October 24th, maybe, or in quite a while. Every day it's there, it's establishing a new date. So I can't help myself. Every day I say, I'm not going to go back today, but I can't help myself. I go back and I have to see it one more time. So it's been a great birding spot lately. And yeah, I would encourage you you actually run into kind of fun. You run into out-of-state visitors there, and it's just a very friendly, social place to be, and very birdie. That's Green Springs. All right. Well, if that's all we got, then thanks everybody for joining in. Again, my thanks to Rick for saving us by the skin of our teeth. He had minutes to go and he pulled it off. So thank you, Rick. Thanks to everybody. And I'm looking forward to the field trip Saturday. Hope we get some. It's gonna be cold, so wear your long johns, and we'll see you out there.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
So long.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
I can't leave the meeting.